Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan and we're back with another Total War Warhammer video. For the first time in quite a while, I'm on Total War Warhammer 2's vanilla state. No mods whatsoever. And this is because a discussion needs to be had regarding the base game factions. These are the factions belonging to races which were playable at the launch of Total War Warhammer 2. When they were released, the factions themselves were perfectly fine, while each of the respective factions per race were obviously very similar, barring some minor changes. They played their part as they were expected to, and they were somewhat different from each other despite once again minor changes. However, as time has progressed, we've seen a bunch of DLC being released for Total War Warhammer 2, and each of the base game races have had new legendary lords being implemented for them. These legendary lords have been implemented with either paid for DLC content or FLC free legendary lords. The majority of these characters have brought something new to the table, usually in the form of new mechanics which are exclusive to them. This makes these new factions rather enjoyable to play, but the big issue here is that the main factions themselves, that of the base game ones, when comparing them to these new legendary lords, aren't really as fun. They are lacking a lot of different mechanics which would make them much more impressive, which in my opinion is a massive shame, mainly considering that a lot of these base game factions could be considered leaders of their race. For example, Malekith is the leader of the Dark Elves. He is their ruler and should be treated as such. The same could be considered for Tyrion, who is the leader of the High Elves. Of course, this is a bit different because the High Elves have independent kingdoms and so on, but I imagine you understand what I mean. Then when we look towards other characters such as Skrork and Queek, yes, they aren't the leaders of their respective clans. However, by Total War standards, they are considered to be their faction leader, as they are the character that leads them. These characters themselves should have a bit of a rework, even if it's just something minor, not only to give players more of an incentive to play them, but to also bring them up to DLC standards. But let me explain myself a little bit better by looking at each base game race and seeing what mechanics come into play. First, we'll look at Tyrion, the character that can be considered the leader of the High Elves. Your goal, whether it's in the Vortex or the Mortal Empires, is to more or less secure yourself in Ulthuan, after which you can then decide to expand out and do as much damage as possible. The same could also be said about Teclis, who will start in Lustria in different locations depending on what campaign. But once again, there's nothing really special about this character. There's no incentive to try and play him again, barring the fact that his Phoenix is quite ridiculous. However, then we can start comparing the twins to other characters implemented for the High Elves, the first being Eliphanar. Generally, he'll play very much the same as standard High Elves. However, he's got access to a bunch more stealth mechanics, which means that you can focus more on a stealth-based type of warfare with this character in particular, and obviously you have the contract system, which will allow you to dramatically increase your income, and finally your Mega Assassin, who can snipe out any legendary lord on the campaign map. Next, we've got Batman, Eltharion the Grim. With a strong narrative focus against Grom the Paunch, the character's campaign is more focused around a story more than anything, where you can increase the defense of your faction capital and generate buffs through your special torture chamber. Alarielle herself is focused more on the defense of Ulthuan as a whole, where potentially you'll want to work with the other Elven Lords in order to remove any threats that may find itself within the island of Ulthuan. You'll get bonuses or negatives depending on Ulthuan's current standing. And finally, Imrik is focused around dragons, where you will be able to meet with these ancient great beasts, learn from them, or even eventually recruit them into your armies. Mazda Mundi is one of the strongest living Slann. In the campaign, he's pretty much just left to his own devices. You can decide to expand northward and fight the Dark Elves, move down south and get rid of the Orcs, or just do as you please without any other special mechanics. The literal same could be said about Krokkar. As soon as you begin your campaign, you're left to your own devices. There's nothing to give you incentive to do something else. Tehenowin, however, introduces a new mechanic known as sacrifices to Sotek, where you'll be able to sacrifice prisoners to your deity. Doing so will reward you with different buffs, certain units, and so on. There's nothing really too different for Tic-Tac-Toe. Yes, there's some changes in terms of faction effects and so on, but no unique mechanics. Nakai, however, works with his own special horde. He is, however, able to capture settlements, but not gain control of them himself. Instead, he dedicates it to one of his chosen deities. This then goes to another faction which is tied to him, and the more buildings he dedicates to a certain deity, the more benefits he'll unlock. Again, nothing really changes for Gorok, barring the fact that he starts with Lord Croak. However, well, everyone eventually gets access to him, so it's not really a special thing, is it? Malekith, the leader of the Dark Elves, and the one true Phoenix King. I'm sure to ruffle some feathers with that comment. This is the leader of the Dark Elves, but there is nothing to command respect from them. In truth, it feels like Malekith's forces and faction as a whole feels like a minor faction rather than commanding the great king himself. Morathi, Malekith's mummy in more ways than one. This is a character that we know has dabbled in a lot of chaos magics, and unfortunately feels rather vanilla barring the fact that she spreads chaos corruption. There's not really too much to go through there. But then we can compare to characters such as Helebron, who requires ritualistic sacrifices. As you sacrifice more and more slaves, you'll be able to unlock various different benefits, and eventually summon forth an army in a black arc to be able to do some damage against your foes. Nothing really changes for Lokir in terms of faction mechanics, which is a bit of a shame, but then again, he was thrown into an already overcrowded Lustria, so his fate was pretty much sealed. Malice Darkblade is plagued by a demon which has possessed him, and you may use the demon to your advantage. You can decide to allow him to take control and get a variety of benefits in one way, or subdue the demon with a special elixir and get benefits another way. Now for the Skaven, we'll start off with Queek Headtaker. He has something rather unique, but only if you play in the Mortal Empires campaign, where you'll be given incentive to try and take 8 peaks. So long as the City of Pillars is not under your control, you'll have some faction negatives. Sure, this is an interesting mechanic, but it's not really that inspired, and if anything, it's only forcing you towards 8 peaks, and that's it. After you take control of the city, everything just reverts back to normal. Skrulk and Clan Pestilence, however, did receive a bit of a rework. Nothing too drastic, but it made them a bit more enjoyable. However, I would say that the faction itself is still lacking. Sure, they've got some new changes and so on, but it's nothing like a new mechanic. The general consensus is that nobody really cares about Tretch Craventail, so we'll move swiftly on. Ikit Claw has his Forbidden Workshop, where he'll be able to upgrade units, focused around the war machines and weapons teams available to Clan Skryre. Eventually, with enough upgrades, being able to recruit special regiments of renown, and obviously we won't really talk about the nuke because everyone already knows everything about that. And lastly, the Deathmaster, who has access to clan contracts where you'll be able to unlock benefits from the other major clans, but by getting positive aspects from certain clans, you will unlock negatives from others. And finally, the Eshin Actions, which gives you access to a multitude of different actions, including the very famous Plunge into Anarchy, where you can essentially, well, delete a faction from the game. So as you can see here, the paid for DLC lords and some of the FLC ones themselves seem to be more complex than the base game factions, which in fairness, yeah, that can happen. You're paying for extra content, you're paying for them to look better, and so on and so forth. However, my issue is that a lot of these characters are leaders and quite important ones in their respective races and factions, so shouldn't they also have something to make them much more enjoyable and unique than easily comparing them to a minor non-playable faction? you'll notice that characters that aren't base game factions but don't have any new sort of mechanics and so on are generally earlier FLC lords, free downloadable content. Eventually, as other FLC lords were introduced, they had their own special mechanics and felt like they were very fleshed out. I'm still stating that Imrik is probably one of the best FLC lords that we have released so far, but it feels to me that the base game factions themselves should get a bit of a rework, at least to add in something to give them more flavor. And yes, there is the argument that there are characters from Warhammer 1 that need a rework themselves. I am not disputing that whatsoever. The thing is, when you compare this to Warhammer Fantasy the Tabletop, each of the characters themselves had their own special mechanics. This would give you a reason to field them, and I believe that the legendary lords themselves should be, well, unique. We're not going to go too much into it, as I believe I've been rambling enough as it is, but we're going to go into some basics just to offer some ideas. And should you guys want, I could dedicate a video series to this, as I believe I could go very detailed into each individual base game faction, and even some of the FLC lords implemented that could do with a bit of a facelift. The best example here for any of the legendary lords would be Morathi herself. In fact, I've actually dedicated a video regarding this, specifically around her and her faction. You see, she forms a part of the Cult of Pleasure, very much inspired by the Cult of Excess. This was a sub-faction in Warhammer Fantasy Battles, where it was a mix of Dark Elves, Demons, and Warriors of Chaos. I'm obviously not saying that this should be replicated, as that would be a drastic change from the Dark Elves themselves, but adding a few units here and there, and a few different mechanics to represent the faction, and then your playstyle is changed by a lot. And another example would be that for Queek Headtaker and Clan Moors. Obviously the incentive needs to change in regards to Karak 8 Peaks. Yes, you still need to focus on getting it, but rather than being negatives until you capture the territory, maybe focus on possible positives, like increasing the damage output of your troops by quite a substantial amount. However, as you control the territory, after around 5 turns, it could trigger a special battle event, where you could be thrown in a three-way battle between yourself, the Goblins of Skarsnik, and obviously the Dwarfs of Belegar Ironhammer. Just something to give some flavour. Not only that, but we are aware that Clan Moors does like to take over smaller clans. There could be incentive to seek out the smaller clans and beat them into submission, very much in a similar way as the Greenskins currently do. There you can choose to either vassalize said clan or just absorb them into your ranks. These are just 2 examples, and like I said, this has the potential for a rather in-depth and detailed video series dedicated to each specific base game faction for Warhammer 2. Not only that, but I could go into detail about the FLC lords for Warhammer 2, which are currently rather lackluster, those with no new mechanics whatsoever, and even go back to Warhammer 1, as there's a few that need to be changed, at least in my opinions of course. But what do you guys think in regards to this? I honestly think that the base game factions should receive a bit of an overhaul whenever possible, to bring them up to scratch with all the factions released via DLC. Not new units or anything, but a few minor changes here and there in terms of mechanics could make a world of a difference. But let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and let's start a bit of a discussion. But with that, my friends, we've come to the end of our video. Thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy the video, might I suggest giving the video a like, or even subscribing to the channel, as it really does help us out. In the description section below are various links to different social media platforms such as Facebook, Instagram, and Discord. Also in the description section is an affiliate link with Element Games, where you could buy loads of hobby-based products, not just Warhammer, for 10 to 25% off. Making a purchase using that link and also our special code, which is also in the description, supports the channel at no extra cost to you, which we think is rather cool. A big thank you to our patrons. Your support means the world to us. It's amazing that people want to help a small channel like us grow and get to a higher level of content. A big thank you to Gibraltar LUSC, Ryan Bertsche, Andrew Prince and Okro for subscribing to us at our Fane level. You guys are super cool. And a big thank you to Edward Yule, VS Vasan, Aaron Whitman and Shaggy for subscribing to us at our King level. Honestly, we can't thank you all enough. And lastly, a big thank you to all of you for liking, sharing and commenting on these videos. Honestly, it's because of you guys that the channel's been growing at such a great pace lately, so we can't thank you all enough. But with that, my friends, thank you so much for watching once again, and we shall see you all again very, very soon. Have a good day.